So you want to get rich in PD2 and you're thinking about doing bossing this season. Let me tell you why it won't make you, specifically, most likely you, rich by, well, engaging in the bossing debate. And this debate has been going on for a while about the whales, the people who do bossing and get all this mega rich loot and all the runes and all the wealth accumulates towards them. It sounds like a familiar argument we hear in society all the time. But what we're really talking about when you're doing something like bossing is value added. Are you taking this expensive set of resources and getting some small margin of profit out of it? And the presumption in society and PD2 is that these people are taking something like the equivalent of a high rune worth of resources and turning it into 3 or 4 or 5 high runes per attempt that they're doing. And that's just not A, again, how it works in society, and B, how it works in PD2. So I got into bossing late because I played Summons On mostly, and Summons On can't do fucking declone. It can on 0, but with those pillars, it certainly can't do the higher tiers, and they told me they were thinking about removing those pillars, and they never got removed, senpai, so fuck you. But the point is, I got into it very late, and I still haven't done tier 2s. I can do tier 0s easy, and if you haven't done those, 80 fire res and 1500 life will do it for you on any build. So give it a shot. But I can get the tier 1s down. I got tier 2 Lucian down. Okay, and I tried bossing as sort of a currency maker the last couple seasons. And even when I'm undercutting hard, the business really isn't flowing in. It costs about a high rune, give or take the time of the season, to, go attempt a boss. And you make maybe a gull if you're up there, but I was undercutting and making an ist per run. And you think that's really cool, but you just don't get people asking for back-to-back runs. You occasionally get someone who says, I want 6 Annies, and you can burn all your resources there, but really, I was making more money, runes, and gear from regular old mapping. It's still just playing the game that was making me the money. Now, the bossing was a steadier source of income, because you have that RNG element removed, but it still wasn't the thing. It was still mapping that was doing it. And this debate sort of comes up every couple seasons in PD2 about, in society, the whales, the rich who are just hoarding everything and all the wealth and blah, blah, blah. And it's because people don't understand the value-added proposition and how difficult it is to actually create profit. They think it's an easy thing. This is the old Marxist argument. The means of production controlled by the workers will free us all, right? Take the hands out of the money out of the hands of the bourgeoisie, and everything will be fine. And the reason that's so wrong is just because of how hard it is to run a team, how hard it is to create a business, how hard it is to create profit. And this can be expressed in a couple different little sayings. You can say that 88% of stockbrokers fail to beat the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones. They can't beat the average with their skill of trading. They lose money on the proposition. 92% of poker players lose money. 90% of middle managers bring negative to 0 value to their company. 91% of businesses fail within their first 3 years of operation. It is a consistent stat that only about 10% of the population can actually create profit. If you're making money as a middle manager or improving something by 1%, guess what? You're in the top 10% of managers. And this is one of the reasons middle management and value added in general is so hard to do. And what you can prove this in society, by the way, you should see on your screen 2 bell curves. We call this a standard distribution. And there's some appreciable difference between these 2 populations. Let's call this one the men and this one the women. And there is a slight difference in aggression levels between men and women. It's about 60-40. You had 200 people and you said all the aggressive people get over here, 60 of them will be men, and the other side, same thing, 40 women on the aggressive side. So when we divide down, say, the middle of the curve for the men, okay, it's kind of even, right? But there's definitely more of the women curve on the non-aggression side here. What happens when we take this slice? Let's say the top 1.7% of people, right here. That's not even. Defeat my own point by drawing it poorly. Right here. Well, this tiny portion of the women is here, and this giant portion of the men. So when you go to the extremes, it becomes 90-10. 90% of the most aggressive people, the people who are so aggressive they can't do anything but respond to things with violence, are men. And that's why 90% of our prison population is male. We're all the social constructionists now, assholes. Are you telling me that 90% of our prison population is male because there's just a bunch of women out there committing crimes and the society refuses to jail them? No, it's that 90% of men are the ones who are committing violent acts. That's why it's just how the numbers work out. Now, that 10% principle, that correlation of the data at the ends, like I said, isn't that uncommon. It's actually a rule in societies. If you have a population, and this is not genetic, by the way, it appears to be entirely cultural, because we've seen it pop up with dozens, if not hundreds, of what we call middlemen minorities. These are minority groups in countries that have an emphasis on education, self-reliance, and literacy. The example that most people know of in the Christendom world, Europe and the Americas, is the Jews, right? They dominated banking, law, and medicine. It's because they were the first ones to have reading as part of their cultural identity. They had to read the Torah to be a good Jew. So of course, when pre-Gutenberg press here, or Gutenberg printing press, and literacy rates were very low, the Jews dominated in that area. They obviously ended up being the ones who would be in the high-tier, value-added professions. And it's not just them either. The Japanese also had this same syndrome in South America. The Indians had it in Uganda, where they dominated similarly. The Germans also did this in East Europe. The Han Chinese did it in Southeast Asia. The Han Chinese were actually called the Jews of Asia because they were so culturally and societally similar to the Jews of Europe. It's just not that uncommon to see these middlemen minorities, these people who have an emphasis on education, dominate the 10% that dominates all of the cultural and economic aspects of a society. And matter of fact, what happens generally in society is if things get too unequal, well, the people at the bottom who don't have anything start blaming and attacking those minorities who are controlling things because of their own success. We saw this time and time again with the expulsion of Jews from Europe. The funniest one was the 16th century expulsion from Spain. They were kicked out for being accused of charging too high of interest rates, usury, on their bank loans. And they were kicked out. All their stuff was given to Christians by the king, and the Christians immediately turned around and charged higher interest rates than the Jews were charging and engaged in usury. The king of Spain actually had to beg the Jews to come back because obviously then their economy started to tank. We saw the same thing happen with Indians in Uganda. They controlled, they were about, 8 to 11% of the population, but they controlled 50 to 90% of all the businesses that exported things from Uganda. And the Ugandan economy eventually collapsed when the dictator, you might have heard of him, Idi Amin, came in and was a precursor of the ethno-nationalism that is plaguing Africa right now. He kicked out all the Indians. He gave them 3 days and said you can take a couple $100 in today's money with you and get out, and kept the wealth, quote unquote, in Africa, in Uganda. And when all the people who were good at value added were kicked out, the economy collapsed. And by the way, it's not even ethnic minorities that had this. Anybody anywhere that had an emphasis on education and hard work was successful and eventually targeted or kicked out or killed, it ended up collapsing society. We saw this with the Soviet Union and the kulaks, which was actually an ethnic group and then sort of became a term for, think of it as small business owning farmer. These are people who just had enough money to maybe hire a couple farm hands and run their own business. And they were the first people targeted because, as much as the communists like to say they were going after the true bourgeoisie, those people had enough money to hire private security and go live on their estates. They were not the first people targeted. They weren't the easiest people to target. The easiest were the quote-unquote kulaks, the small business owners. And they were the first ones shipped off to other parts of, namely Siberia, their farms confiscated, and then the people who don't know how to do value-added, took over those farms, and, I think we know the story of the Soviet Union with their starvation and their famines that were caused by this. That's what I mean. Value added is difficult. Only about 10% of the population can do it. And you can see where racism pops up, because this was the idea. It was always the other race. This minority group was stealing from the majority, and it's just not true. They were the only ones creating value. And you've seen this, like I said, time and time again. The Japanese in South America, the Indians in Africa, the Germans in East Europe, the Japanese in South America, the Jews in Europe, the Han Chinese. Time and time again, I'm rambling now, but the point is, making value added and complaining about bossers making all this money, it doesn't do anything. And in a perfect society, you don't want to let this inequality of wealth get too high, because there's also something called a Gini coefficient. It's the relative inequality over a given area. And if things get too unequal over a given area, well, the murder rate goes up. It's a direct correlation to violent crime, and a direct correlation. It's a 0.7, 0.8 correlation. It's about as strong as it gets in the social sciences. And so what you do in society is you say, okay, all the people getting all this money, we're going to tax them and redistribute some of the wealth in some way to the people at the bottom and try to equalize things out so that society doesn't collapse in on itself. This is kind of the problem with our politics. The lefties think that value added is just this evil money-grubbing capitalist taking everything, and the right thinks because this is natural that you don't have to do anything about it. Yeah, you do, or you end up like Brazil, the murder capital or the murder country of the world. And the reason Brazil's murder rates are so high is because they're one of the few countries in the world that have a lot of money, relatively speaking, but they have the millionaire resorts for all the tourists and the rich people right next to the favelas. And that means the relative inequality over this small given area is very high. All of the people with nothing see the people with everything. They start to covet. Hannibal Lecter was right. You covet what you see every day. This is also why in places like Hazard County, Kentucky, the poorest county in America, the murder rate and crime rate in general is incredibly low because no one has any money. There's no covetousness. There's no resentment. And the same thing happens in areas that everyone is relatively rich, like Singapore. Now, this is also, again, why are crime rates in general per capita more or higher in cities than rural areas? It's because there's more rich and poor people interacting in cities. It's the covetousness aspect. It's the Gini coefficient. So the whole point of this is the idea that you can get into bossing and just do this and just make all the money. You can't. Most of us don't have that time. Most of us don't have, or the skill, right? You might get into it like me and realize, hey, maybe I'm not good enough to kill tier 2s at all. And you just don't have the wherewithal, the means to do it. And in video game land, luckily, the poor people can't rise up, come into our games, and stone us to death and raid our stashes. So there's no redistribution scheme. There's no societal fix to this like we've done in the real world. This is video game land where everyone's free to do what they want. So any sort of schema that people always suggest about, controlling the bosses and making the maps more accessible, it's like, unless the boss fights are completely free, and there's an encouragement factor for people to do it. Like, you can't have an Annie unless you attempt declone, which would honestly be a really stupid change. You will never stop the whales from being whales. They have more time. And this is a simple game of kill things, loot drops, and you pick it up. So the people with more time to kill shit more consistently are going to accumulate wealth in the hands of a few. It's a natural rule. It's a natural law. And I don't think there's any way to really change it. So if you're thinking about getting into bossing, my encouragement is do it for fun. The equivalent of bossing with the societal example here is the emphasis on education and hard work and grit and determination and the wherewithal to go out there and start your own business. We also know about businesses, it's not just about that. It's about your ethics and your drive and your want. And generally speaking, our system is more meritocratous than people give it credit for. The people doing the right thing for the right reasons tend to rise to the top. They get corrupted when they get up there, which is a problem we haven't solved, but they all start out that way, or most do. So if you want to get into bossing this season, don't do it for the money. Do it for the challenge. Do it because it's something fun to do. Do it because it's something new. Do it because you have a new build you want to try out. Do it for the right reasons. Don't do it to go out there and, try to make your mark. Try to make money.